really delighted to be here again today. For today is the 25th broadcast of the weekly early morning show. And today, like this entire month ahead, we're going to be looking at the topic of consultative selling. This is perhaps one of the more sophisticated business development topics, and it isn't something which I would begin with when I was working or when I've been working with different law firms. So first, I would really recommend that you pick up some of the basics of business development, such as new client hunting, sales writing, networking, cross-selling, and so on. And after you've got those kind of basics, after you've got those fundamentals sorted, then it'd be recommendable to come across something like consultative selling. So consultative selling, this isn't a beginner's topic in professional services sales. Still, if you've watched this broadcast a few times before, if you've seen some of the recordings on YouTube, I think you'll be ready for this and you'll find it quite interesting. So as we know, the early morning show is every Thursday morning from 8:30 to 9:30 Central European time. Usually I'm doing this live from Prague in the Czech Republic. Today I'm here in sunny Zagreb in Croatia. And like I mentioned, for the next 4 broadcasts, we're going to look just at consultative selling. And here you can see the different pictograms. There are the 16 key concepts which we're going to be covering today. If you would like a copy of the slides which I show you today is just the pictographic version, where each pictogram symbolizes and represents a key learning objective. If you want a copy of the word version slides, which has an explanation of the key concepts as one paragraph on a slide, drop me an email to jjmcveigh@nichedonia.com, and I'm happy to share them with you. In fact, if you are even thinking about applying consultative selling to your practice, you really should contact me, not just for the word slides. I mean, I've got lots of other information, but this is one of the more challenging topics. So if we take a step back, what exactly is consultative selling? I'm not sure that everybody knows. Maybe we can contrast consultative selling against what it's not. What it's not is something which I would call simple selling. In simple selling, for example, you have a product. I don't know if you can see that's my telephone. You have a product or a service. We analyze this as the salesperson. We look at the features, the advantages, the benefits, the new unique value propositions. We formulate that. And when we have someone come to us, a prospect, we might even have a sales script or a structure where we are pitching this to them. I would call that simple selling. Simple selling is kind of linear. We start, we present, we pitch, and then at the end, we try to close. So we more or less know the direction of the conversation. Consultative selling is much more useful in professional services where you might not even know the needs of your client. In consultative selling, it is not linear. It's like a probability tree. There are many different directions in which it goes. And in consultative selling, it's very much about asking questions and discovering needs and then satisfying those needs. I think simple selling is more like the associated idea of selling that people have from television. Simple selling, you think of a car salesman, and he sells, and for him, selling is telling. In consultative selling, however, which is very good for lawyers, it's a pity that almost no law firms actually use it. Consultative selling is asking. Selling isn't telling. And this is a very big competitive advantage of consultative selling. The best salesman never sounds like a salesman. And in consultative selling, if you're doing this appropriately, if you're doing this correctly, you are asking questions, and you can persuade the buyer by asking questions, not just by telling them. So it doesn't even look like selling, which is a very big advantage. If you sound like you're selling, people have a thing called RRR, reactive rejection response. They don't want to be sold to, they don't want to know what you're selling, they don't care, and they're going to close off. So if you take the approach selling is telling, there's a good chance you're going to encounter RRR. So what is consultative selling? Consultative selling is basically you're going to ask open questions. Open questions are like how, why, what, where, when. And you're going to ask 3 or 4 different types of consultative selling questions in a specific order. And by asking these questions, not only do you identify needs, but you decrease price sensitivity and you increase desire. You convert implicit needs into explicit needs, and it makes it much easier to close at the end. Maybe one way to think of this is about what's really going on in the legal industry around the world. And guys, I'm going to be very critical because I can, because I've worked with over 400 law firms in 70 countries. Most, if not all law firms, have a black box approach to their consultations. And what this means is we have no idea what the hell different partners and lawyers are saying and doing in the different consultations with new potential clients. No idea. It's a black box. So let's imagine you go to the office and the office manager or one of the secretaries says, hey, in room 1, there's a potential client, go and do your magic, speak to them. So you go and speak to them. Do you actually have any structure of how you're going to do that consultation? I suspect you do not. I suspect that what you're doing is exactly what your competitors are doing and what most lawyers and law firms have been doing for decades, if not centuries, which is pure improvisation. Absolute improvisation. And it means the quality of my legal consultation isn't going to depend on the brand of the law firm that I go and speak to. It's going to depend on the luck of the draw. If I speak to partner A, I'll have one consultation, partner B, another one, partner C, another one altogether. So most law firms, they have a total black box approach. I've worked with lots of different law firms, I've mentioned this, and I think they're very good law firms. DLA Piper, Deloitte Legal, all of the big 4, Cameron McKenna, Baker McKenzie, Clifford Chance, Dentons, all of these guys. But is there any difference between how they would do an initial meeting with me if I came to them as a potential client? Correct me if I'm wrong. Perhaps I'm missing something, but I don't think so. So the black box approach is not the best approach to have. You should have some kind of unified structure for your consultations, which doesn't vary depending on whichever partner or lawyer you speak to. I would call these elements. You could look at this in terms of practical elements or physical elements. Make it policy to have your business cards with you, to have a dress code, to have brochures, to have a branded diary, to have a pen, to have like all of these different physical things. You can have a template of what you need to have and bring to the meeting. Some kind of research, a spectrum analysis. And if you don't know what that is, you can ask me or read one of my previous presentations. A spectrum analysis of that client, some background research. So those would be the practical elements. And then in terms of the sales or consultative elements, how about small talk to begin with? That's a good idea. What about not just open questions, but bothering questions and value questions and worst case scenario questions, different types of open questions, which we're going to come to. How about cross-selling? Not just as a nice thing to do if you have the mood, but actually as company policy. How about closing and trial closing? How about summarization? So you can have a template of the best sales elements as well. It's amazing for me that all these clever law firms, which earn millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, I don't think they actually have this. A few of them, they might pay at the whim of a managing partner in one of the jurisdictions for some kind of one-day sales training. But that's not going to make a difference on the kind of global level of how that company operates. So my big advice, my very big advice would be, if you want to have a definite competitive advantage compared to your competitors, adopt a unified, integrated approach to prospect and new client meetings, including the practical elements and the consultative elements. Needless to say, I've written a book about this. I have a paper about this. I have a template on the ideal consultative selling meeting. Drop me an email, jjmcveigh@nicodonia.com, and we can talk about this. I can share some stuff with you. So black box approach isn't very good. Different way to look at this would be like a doctor analogy. In consultative selling, think of yourself as a doctor. and you're speaking to a patient, you have to ask the patient how they feel. You have to probe. You have to find any different pain points. Even if the patient thinks they're well, they might not be. And you mustn't do what the patient tells you. If you do what the patient tells you, and then the patient goes off and dies because of what you had done, that would be medical malpractice. Definitely, you do not do what your patient tells you, because you're the doctor. You had the 7 years of education, the years of practice. Same thing as a lawyer. Do not just do what your client tells you. Ask questions, and then you make your diagnosis. In consultative selling, the way that you're doing this diagnosis, the way that you're examining them, is through the open questions. How, why, what, where, when. Not closed questions. Closed questions can be answered with a yes or a no. That's not good. You don't want to do that. You want to ask open questions. And you follow the 80-20 rule. In a new client consultation, you speak 20% of the time asking open questions. Let them speak 80% of the time so that you can get that information and understand what on earth the issue might be. And the funny thing is, when it comes to inspiring or motivating lawyers and partners to get these kind of meetings, to get these T for two, to get these new prospect meetings, sometimes managing partners in law firms say, hey, if you bring a new client in to the firm, we'll give you 10%. That's called an origination bonus, 10% of that revenue. Keep in mind that very few lawyers and partners actually know how to get new clients. Sometimes they will try and they will probably fail because they haven't had any training in this. And it's going to demotivate them. And this disincentivizes people from developing current or ex-clients, which are a much easier target. We know the 1-2-4 rule, where it takes 1 hour to get new billable hours from current clients, 2 hours to get new billable hours from ex-clients, and 4 hours to get new billable hours from totally new clients. The origination bonus idea, saying to people, hey, we'll give you 10% of new revenues you generate, is actually going to decrease the revenues to your practice, and it will decrease cross-selling and upselling and current client development. So don't do that. If you really want lawyers or partners to do business development, a financial motivation system generally doesn't work. I don't think I've seen any financial motivation systems around the world which manage to really motivate and inspire on a group level people to do business development. But what I found did work is when a person, a lawyer or a partner, becomes a white knight. And a white knight is somebody who very sincerely and strongly understands the value proposition. They have a very clear understanding of the legal product or solution which they can pitch. They have very clear understanding of their competitive advantages, the unique value propositions, which differentiates their practice from other law firms, other practices. And because they passionately believe in it, they are more able to communicate this and be inspired and motivated by this. So don't make the mistake of thinking that financial motivation is necessarily the winning solution to get people to do business development. Probably passion, motivation, and belief in what you're doing for your own development, for your growth, because you understand the value of what you're doing. Being a white knight, that's going to work a lot easier. And if you are going to do proactive business development and consultative selling, you're going to discover a lot of commodity work, which is okay. That's cheap and easy kind of work. But you really want to be on the lookout and to develop premium work, the complicated, high-value stuff that not all lawyers can do, and therefore it costs more. Now, at the start of a client consultation, we understand that small talk is a good idea. You should build a rapport with the person. It's much more important to demonstrate that you have emotional and social intelligence to a new client, that you're a nice, regular person, than to begin to show off, to be very cocky about your legal skills. Nobody doubts your legal skills. You know, you're a lawyer, you're probably good. That's why they come here. I don't think you have anything to prove. You don't need to preach to the converted. So you build the rapport, but then what do you do after that? What I typically see partners doing, I'm not even talking about lawyers, is they would ask something like, so how can we help you? Which translated into blunt English means, what's your problem? Of course, you don't say, what's your problem? But that's what you mean. How can we help you? What seems to be the matter? What can we do for you today? Wrong, wrong, wrong. This is called the what's your problem mistake. If you start your consultation like this, you're asking for their explicit needs. They will tell you what they think is their explicit need, and they can be wrong. They're telling you they need a limited liability company. You might incorporate it, which would be the wrong thing to do, because if you ask lots of open questions, you discover they don't need any type of legal entity in your country, not a limited liability company, not anything at all. They can operate through a distribution model. They can do something else. So you do not begin by asking, what's your problem? Or the equivalent derivative polite forms of that. Probably it'd be a good idea for you to begin by asking background questions. You want to get a background, a bigger picture. These are the easiest questions. How is your work going? What issues have you been encountering recently? How do you find the current work environment? What's been your story so far? So background questions are the easiest. You get some background about what's going on. And of course, open questions, how, why, what, where, when, these are the ones that you want to be asking the most. You're going to probe. But these kind of open questions can't be answered with just a yes or a no. So it forces the potential client to speak more. After you've asked background questions, you can ask bothering questions. Now, be careful. Bothering questions, something like, what's bothering you, Thomas? What challenges have you been encountering? What troubles are you seeing? What has been keeping you up at night? You're delicately going beyond the background questions. So in the background questions, they maybe mention that they've had some issues with employment, with the labor unions, with HR, people quitting, turnover. That's good. They tell you the background. And then you ask, what's bothering you about it? What's the irritation? What's the pain point? You don't ask them, what's your problem? Because they'll tell you explicit needs. You're asking to get a deeper understanding, bothering questions, because then you can see some of the implicit issues. Of course, if something is bothering them, if there is a pain point, that's good, because we might be able to have the legal solution to it, and therefore we can make some money and add value by helping them. So background questions, you ask 3, 4, 5 of these, and then based on any interesting points that seems to be a lead into bother, you ask some bothering questions. After you've asked bothering questions, the third type of question would be worst case scenario questions. So you find something that's bothering them, and as a lawyer, you know how this can all go horribly, terribly wrong. And you ask them, what happens if, and you hypothesize a possible worst case scenario. So in the background questions, they mention problems with employment. Worst case scenario, how much would your company lose per week if they announce a general strike? What will happen from the perspective of the board of directors if the employment ability collapses 50%? How will supplies be damaged if we cannot produce for 3 weeks? How much per day would you lose by a strike? So you take the worst case scenario, and you don't tell them about how awful and terrible this could be. You ask them about it. Because when you tell somebody, for example, if I tell you, worst case scenario, how you're going to have to pay 10,000 euros. The person can be in denial. It can be like water off a duck's back, and they ignore you. It's okay. It's not happened. It's not going to be happening. We're fine. But if I say to you, how will you pay this 10,000 euro fine if the authorities impose that on you next week? Where's the money going to come from? By asking a worst case scenario as a question, rather than as a hypothetical statement, it brings it much closer to heart. And they are much less likely to be able to escape it and to slip into denial. So worst case scenario questions are much more persuasive than worst case scenario statements. And you can go and make a worst case scenario chain. Worst case leading to worst case leading to worst case. And by doing this, you have the background questions, bothering questions, worst case scenario questions. By doing this, you're kind of putting salt into the wound. You're making that pain worse. You're making them realize the serious nature of the situation. You're decreasing price sensitivity. You're increasing desire. Let's imagine if someone comes to you, you do white collar crime, and they face the very real prospect of going to prison for a long, long time. I think their price sensitivity is going to be very low. They'll pay whatever they need in order for you to help them. I think the doctor analogy is the same thing. If you know that, God forbid, I hope this doesn't happen, but if somebody realized that they have to do some very, very serious surgery, something on the heart or on the brain, doesn't matter how much it costs, you're going to pay. You sell your house, you take out a loan, anything, you're going to pay. So need and desire are very closely connected. And when a person understands the worst case scenario, and in legal services it's pretty bad, that will decrease the resistance to be paying and increase the desire for the solution. And then the fourth and final type of question is called the value of solution questions. And this is the most difficult one. Let's imagine we know that in this kind of employment situation, what they need to do is reach a certain type of agreement with the labor union, and you've done it before, and this is actually pretty easy. A very silly thing for you to do would be to tell them that, because then they'll say, oh, thank you. In-house counsel will take notes and they'll do it, and you don't get paid. So that's called a spoiler. What you want to do is a kind of teaser. You know the solution, and you ask them, in the event that we could make this issue be resolved by the end of next month, what opportunities would that give you? How much would the board of directors appreciate this, and how could that affect your monthly, your quarterly bonus? What would be the implications for the next project if these issues were resolved? So these are the hardest type of questions. If you can think of the previous questions, worst case scenario questions, as being stick, that you're hitting them on the head with it, scaring the hell out of them, the value of solution questions, this is the carrot. This is enticing them. And by them telling you the value of that solution, again, they decrease their sensitivity to price and they increase the desire for the solution. The best person to persuade somebody to buy something is the person themselves. By them answering your value of solution questions, they are convincing themselves about the value of your solution. I have not seen very many lawyers do this at all, actually, because almost no lawyers have had sales training. It's a pretty good thing to do. It takes a bit of practice. So in consultative selling, at least in this type of consultative selling, there are many other kind of templates you can use. We have background questions, bothering questions, worst case scenario questions, and value of solution questions. And they have to be in that particular order. Now, as you've been going through these 4 different types of questions, maybe spending 5 to 10 minutes on each of them, you have been increasing the desire for a solution from that potential client. And probably after 30 to 60 minutes, they are at peak desire. You can see that they're sitting forward, they're listening, you can read their body language, they have this expression. At peak desire, after value of solution questions, only then, only then, that's when you start talking about pricing. That's when you try and close and get their agreement. If you do this too early, before you reach peak desire, they're not convinced and you will lose. And if you bore them, if you do death by PowerPoint for an hour and then start talking, they're going to be sleepy or hungry or just annoyed at you, and that's not going to work. So you need to aim for peak desire. If someone starts asking you about pricing at the start, say, I don't know. And they're thinking, what on earth? How do you not know? And you say, well, I don't know. I need to have a bigger picture. I have to actually understand the whole scheme of things, and then I can tell you about pricing, which is actually true. In legal services, you do need to know the bigger picture. You can jump to conclusions and give a price, and that would be wrong because you didn't understand the entirety of the scope of the question. You need to then do, after these 4 different types of open questions in consultative selling, you need to do closing and trial closing. A close means you ask for the sale. So what do I see most lawyers and partners doing? Nothing. No closing at all. They do not ask for the sale. They say something silly like, let's email each other. Let's email each other. That's like you have a shop and you're letting that potential buyer say, I'll think about it and work out the shop. They're not coming back. You probably just lost a sale. So no closing is a very bad idea. And that's exactly what I'm seeing in almost all of the law firms. You need to close. However, direct closing, saying at the very end here at peak desire, so shall we start on Monday? So would you prefer fixed fee or billable hours. That's dangerous because they might still have some objections and you haven't encountered them, so they reject you. So they say no. What you need to do is trial closing, trial closing, trial closing. A trial close means you're testing the water. It's a question of opinion. And only once you've done a few trial closes and there's no objections, then you do the close, which is a question of decision. Trial close, question of opinion. Close, question of decision. So you're speaking, you do your open questions, and then you say, and how do you feel so far? And then they say, well, I'm not sure you really do have so much experience in employment law. This is a complex issue. Good. And then you talk more, ask some questions, overcome these objections. And then you say, well, and what are you thinking now? Would this solution perhaps meet your needs? And they say, again, what about your industry experience? I'm not sure that you have so much experience with companies of our type. Another objection. You overcome that objection. And then you say, okay, so I think we've resolved any doubts you might have had about our experience and about the industry. How do you feel about the solution we've proposed? And they say, I think that's okay. You say, so shall we start on Monday? That's it. That's a close. So the worst thing you can do is no closing. Next worst is direct closing. And what you should be aiming towards, trial close, trial close, trial close, and close. And I don't want to hear any excuses about paperwork or KYC. Deal with that after the meeting. But you got to be brave and you got to try and get that agreement, a gentleman's agreement, if nothing else, while you're actually there. Yes, it's the most difficult part of the consultation, but yes, you have to actually do it. If they say that you're too expensive, then you disagree and you ask them why. Why do they think so? They're going to say something silly, compare you to some very small local boutique, and then you answer with your UVPs, your unique value propositions, and your competitive advantages. You cannot answer the objection of you're too expensive if you don't know your own competitive advantages. Yes, so don't be put off by the you are too expensive objection. Be prepared for it. And don't be afraid to do markups. So many times at the trial closing stage, I see law firms, even partners, doing silly things and giving discounts. No discounts. If something has got to be done quicker, better, more difficult, do a markup. There's nothing wrong with saying, usually this costs 100 euros an hour, but for you it's going to be 120. And then you tell them why. Stop giving discounts. No discounts, no discounts. Very bad idea. You discredit yourself, you devalue yourself. Even volume discounts are a bad idea. And giving unilateral concessions, a discount in exchange for nothing, is just plain silly. I mean, I've written 2 textbooks about legal services pricing and discounting and upselling. So if you're interested, that's another topic we can talk about. Believe me, discounts are not a good idea, and almost everyone is making that mistake. Do markups. And speak simply. Throughout your entire consultation, plain English, be able to be understood by a non-specialist. I call this the Babushka Rule. So when I was living in Russia, I would use this as an example, that a simple babushka, assuming she's not a legal expert, should be able to understand what you're saying. And if someone doesn't understand what you're saying, it doesn't mean that they are stupid. It means that you're a bad communicator. And I'll share a little secret with you. A lot of lawyers, especially some of the younger lawyers, but some of the more senior lawyers, are not actually as good at communicating as they think. So apply the Babushka Rule. No archaisms, no legalisms. The best lawyer doesn't sound like a lawyer. Sound like a normal business person. Yeah, you need to be a trusted business partner. Nobody wants a smart lawyer, especially one that sounds like they're coming from the 19th century. Keep it simple, silly. The KISS rule, don't overcomplicate it. Be sure to summarize what they're saying to make sure that you have understood and so that they see that you have understood. And summarize and summarize and summarize. And then at the end, summarize once again. Apply the KISS rule. Keep it simple, silly. And that's basically the rough introduction to consultative selling. I'm trying to keep today's broadcast short because we don't have an interview. I've decided that face-to-face interviews are much more engaging than doing it just on Teams. So I'll include face-to-face interviews with different partners and managing partners. It's a lot of information, actually, for the first broadcast on consultative selling, but it gives you an overview of what consultative selling is. Let's summarize. Most law firms have no idea what's actually happening in the consultations that the lawyers and partners are doing. With most law firms, it's basically improvisation, which is a black box approach, which means they're missing a huge amount of opportunities in terms of the different sales elements and consultative elements that you could include. You could have something like a consultative selling methodology, which is very good for high value premium sales. And that's basically asking open questions in a number of, in a structure. So in this case, I showed you background questions, bothering questions, worst case scenario questions, value of solution questions. That would be the heart of your consultation. Before that, you might have small talk. After that, you would have other elements as well. Like when you reach peak desire, you would want to include trial closing and then closing. At the end, you might say, oh, by the way, as you head for the door and put in a cross sell. And there's a lot more as well. But that's why we're going to have another 3 broadcasts about consultative selling. If you have any questions or thoughts on this, drop me an email, jjmcveigh@nichedonia.com. It's a really interesting topic. I sometimes do a full day of consultative selling training with law firms. So that would be something like 8 hours or 10 hours. And to really do this well, you need role play. You need to actually do some practice. So it's a little bit like riding a bike. You can't very well read about riding a bike. You probably need to actually be doing it. So again, a shameless little advert from me. If you think consultative selling might be something beneficial for your practice, well, I'm the man who can help you with that. I have some experience with it. Okay, and on that point, I think I'm going to wrap up today. I hope that was interesting, and I'll see you next Thursday, where we'll continue with consultative selling part 2, and we will have a face-to-face interview as well to make the broadcast a little bit longer and maybe a little bit more practical, not just the theoretical content. Okay, thank you very much.